Hola chamas y chamos, welcome back to a new episode of... Hola chamas y chamos, welcome back to a new episode of Álvaro Dev Labs. Today's episode is special, and not because the upside down world resembles what it feels like to be on a Friday with a bug in production and suddenly your boss decided to leave, but to honor our heroes, that tech lead that stayed with us by pizza, some beers, until we find out the solution for the bug. This video is dedicated to all the Eddie monsters that helped us when we were juniors. So enough epicness for a moment, let's jump directly on the topic of today's video. Today we're gonna talk about the difference between server-side rendering, client-side rendering, and static site generation architectures. We're gonna explain it using our favorite framework, which is Nuxt. It's a framework that allows you to create this type of applications using Vue. Before we jump into that, few words from our sponsors. This video is sponsored by Storyblok. Looking for a CMS solution that is great both for marketing teams and developers? Look no further. Storyblok is the headless CMS solutions that you always wanted to have. See how easy it is to change content for your website with a real-time visual editor, creating a delightful customer experience for your teams. Go from a content update to production in no time. Storyblok is easily integrable with multiple tech stacks, making your dev team's life easier. Go and try it for free at storyblok.com. Let's start the video by explaining client-side rendering, which I think is the easiest one to explain at the beginning, and also will help us to understand how server-side rendering works and also static site generation. So here I have a little diagram that explains how CSR works. Okay, you have your client, which is probably the browser, and this sends a request to the web server. The web server will respond with a blank page, an empty HTML with only a reference to your JavaScript bundle and to your CSS styles. Okay, then the clients start running that JavaScript. It interprets it, and let's say we are creating a Vue application. This Vue application will, basically JavaScript generated by them, will create all the virtual DOMs for your UI components, and then it will get them into the DOM and render them. So after the Vue application is run on the client, you have a fully rendered page with all your UI components, your content, your images. Okay, so we are gonna start as always creating a new project. I'm gonna create a new Nuxt application using npx Nuxt init, and we're gonna call this one Nuxt upside down. So all good. Let's open it in VS Code. Okay, and we have a brand new Nuxt 3 application. So for the sake of keeping this tutorial short enough and really concentrate on the topic of CSR, SSR, and SSG, I already created a small app here with a header and some fonts and colors that resembles the TV series from Stranger Things. And what I did was install a module for Nuxt called CSS Nuxt, and added some configuration here with some colors. If you like to use the same one as I'm doing, I'm going to paste the link for the repository in the description below, so you can check it or you can start with your own one. Okay. Also, I'm using a layout structure. Okay. And I create a page called index.view, which is the one that we are gonna use today. Okay. So we're gonna explain CSR, or client-side rendering, first. So by default, Nuxt already gives you SSR by default. Okay, so you need to explicitly set the server-side rendering as false in the configuration. So if you save, I have the terminal running here. So how can we check that? We go to inspect mode, and if we go to the tab of network, if you remember correctly at the beginning of the tutorial explained the client-side render delivers a blank page. So if I refresh here and we take a look of localhost, we will see that this is actually a blank page. Okay, And in the response, if we go deeper here, we are gonna see, let me zoom a little bit more this. We're gonna see that we have a div with the identification of Nuxt and some script that already says that this is not server-side rendering. It has some assets here, and then it has the imports for the bundles that Nuxt creates, okay? Here, the client and the entry.mjs. So we can say for sure that this is client-side rendering. So sure, this application is fine with only a header, but let's make it better. So I'm planning to have a grid with several cards with each one of the characters from the TV series. So to do that, we can get to VS Code, and we're gonna create an API that returns the characters, okay? So one cool thing about Nuxt is that if we create a server route here, and we create something like API characters, we can easily create an API. So this is gonna be a .ts. If you don't know how to do this part, these are called server routes. I have a specific tutorial here in the channel about Nuxt server routes. So I recommend you to check it first if you feel lost in this part, because I'm not gonna explain it that much. So we're gonna create an event handler here. We're gonna export it, and inside of it we're gonna return an object that contains like a state, so to speak, and we are gonna put our characters here. So I already have the characters in an array, so I'm just gonna copy and paste it here. We have Steve, Eddie, Mad Max, 11, etc. Okay, so we're gonna save this one, and to see if it's actually working, we're gonna go to the page index, the home page, and we are gonna set a pre-tag here, and here we're gonna say const data, and we are gonna use fetch composable, and here we need to put like the route, which is gonna be API characters, and what else? Yeah, I think this is an asynchronous one, so like this, and we don't need to pass anything else. Something is not correct, maybe. Okay, here. And to check the data, we're gonna add in the pre-tag the binding for it. So let's refresh. Okay, so here we have our characters. So the application is fetching them correctly. If we go to inspection mode again and we check the network tag, let's refresh here, and we look for characters, we see that our client-side rendering is fetching an API with the characters that we have on the server. Okay, so far so good. Now let's create some UI for this data. If you're more interested in seeing the client-side rendering conclusions and then server-side rendering SSG, you can skip this part of building the app, actually, because right now in this section I'm going to do the UI for each one of the cards. So if you are not interested in that, just skip to the next chapter. Okay, let's do it quickly. So here, instead of this, we're gonna create a div. This div is going to have a class of container and mx auto to center, and it's going to be a grid with I don't know, like 4 columns and a gap of, let's put 8 for now. Later we can see if it's too much. So we're gonna create a card by each one of the characters. So here, let's create a, well, we can use the color like primary, but maybe it's too much. So I'm gonna create it white first, and before, okay, character in characters, but we don't have characters defined. So one cool thing here is that if you put 2 dots, then you are doing like an alias of this variable, because if you have several use fetch and every one of them is using data, then it doesn't work. But also we can do like this data and simply do data.character. Okay, then let's deconstruct this, and we're gonna use the name. What else do we have in the API? I'm gonna put the API on the right. So we have the name, we have a photo, we have the alias, and what else? Let's put an occupation in the card. Okay, so that looks fine. Let's enter here, and we're gonna create a div with an aspect ratio, maybe square, probably no aspect ratio square. I think it's the, I don't know why it's doing that. Come on. Okay, now. And probably we want to add overflow hidden, and then our image tag, which is gonna be this one. Perfect. Let's put the name as the alt, and we're gonna create like a content part. So let's add like P2 maybe. So PG2 and PX4, something like that. H2 with this. Okay, maybe this one, because it's the alias. Let's put like a text as M and font italic. Okay, font bold, font display. And text red, so accent. Before we show it in the browser, I made a mistake here. It's characters, so that's why it wasn't showing. Okay, so now if I refresh here, we should be able to see the cards with each one of them. So we only see the images because this div class. Okay, aspect ratio, like, oh, because I put it inside of the div here. So this needs to be outside of the div that creates the aspect ratio for it. Here, let's put like a shadow LG. And now we have something better. Yeah, something like this. Fair enough. Let's do some adjustments, like this bad boy here. Maybe only XL, and having a margin will be nice. Yeah, okay, fair enough. Also, this one here could have some margin button also. And we have our characters here. So for the last part of our client-side application, I added a slug property to each one of the characters, and actually, for the sake of doing the tutorial easier, I'm gonna put the data outside of the event handler. You will see why. Okay, so export cons characters equal to the array that we defined previously. Okay, it has an error because it was like this. Okay, fine. Then what else do we need to do? What we want to achieve is that whenever we click one of them, we go to a detail page in order to also explain better server-side rendering, right? So let's do that. Let's go to the VS Code. So instead of a div here, I'm gonna replace it with a Nuxt link. We are going to get the slug from the API. Okay, let's save, and here we are gonna set 2. We are going to use template strings, and we are gonna pass the slug. Okay, so far so good. Let's go here. Maybe refresh. Okay, so if we now click, we're gonna go to a 404 because we haven't defined any page layout or anything to it. So to do that, let's go here, and inside pages, let's create a new file, and we're gonna use a catch all root with the slug.view. So this is what it's going to do is whatever is in the root is going to catch the slug as one of the parameters. So let's create a small thing here. For now, we are not going to get anything but the root. Okay, so how do we check that the root is correct? We can use const here, const root equal use route. Okay, it's lovely how I pronounce it the two different ways in the same phrase. Forget about it. And we're gonna put it here, the slug in the page, just to check if it's working. Actually, it's not gonna work because I had to do the binding, so that's better. Let's test it. Maybe I have to restart the server. Could be. Let's run it again. Let's see what happens. Okay, we have a Steve Harrington pass it as a slug, so it's working. Now let's do something with that slug, right? We want to get a specific character from here. The thing is that we have only defined one route for the API, so we need to create another one. In this case, I'm gonna follow the same kind of convention here, and I'm going to use a slug, okay? .ts. Okay, so we are gonna export the function define event handler. Actually, how we did it here, it was a cons, right? I'm going to remove this here. So yeah, let's do it like this. An event handler, but this time we're gonna pass the event. And instead of returning an object, let's return the following. So we want to get the slug that we pass as the URL, right? So to do that, let's just return event context parameters slug to see if it works. Okay, we need to call this new API route on the characters in this page, in the slug one, right? So to do that, we're gonna use the same use fetch, but this time we're gonna pass the slug as one of the parameters. So let's see what it returns. So it returns right now, maybe I had to restart the server, could be. Let's see if it works. Because right now it's returning like the default HTML. To still do that, why it's doing that, let's check the network tab. So it's doing API characters Steve Harrington, and this is the one that is returning the. Okay, so it's not catching the route, right? Oh well, of course, I made a huge mistake. So we're trying to get characters and the slug. So here in the API, let's create a new folder called characters, and we're gonna move characters inside. And we're gonna move a slug. But in order to this to work, we need to rename this to index.ts because it's gonna take the name of the folder that is inside. So yeah, we have now Steve Harrington. Cool. The thing is that we don't have the header for some reason, but that's fine. Because here we are querying the API characters. So if we go here and we refresh, we do have Steve Harrington here, so it is working. Okay, cool. No, I didn't modify this. So yeah, we have returned the slug, but we want to return exactly the character with that slug. So that's why in here we set characters outside of the function to be able to grab it here. So characters find, we want to find the one with the slug equal to the parameter that we're passing, right? It's equal. We are missing parentheses here, and of course we have an import or characters. So let's save it and see what happens. For now we have a 500 error. So characters find, of course, because I'm doing a default import instead of grabbing the this one here. So probably now it's gonna work. Let's refresh, and here we have our character detail. Let's quickly create some UI for it, and then we are ready to go. So in the slug page, let's replace this with container, max auto. Maybe let's do a grid with calls to gap 4. We need to put grid here also. And this is all going to be a card maybe, so background white and shadow LG. And in one of the columns, we're gonna set a class aspect ratio square for the image. So the source of the image is gonna be the data, the photo maybe, and the alt is gonna be data.name again. And in the other side, let's put P4 maybe. Yeah. P4. And the side here, autocomplete it. Haha, I love it. Okay, and maybe add some more info for them, like, I don't know, the height, maybe. No, born. When he was born, let's see, but not in italic. So let's go here. Okay, we have the image and we have the info, but it's looking really bad because we need to put the overflow here, maybe hide them. And what else could be the issue? Grid calls. What about the flags? And forget about the rest. Okay, now we're ready. It's not the greatest UI ever, but it fits the purpose. So in case you have this issue when you navigate to one of the detail pages of one character and then you try to go to another and it's still the same data, is because for now, as I understand from the discussions on the GitHub repository, you need to add a parameter here on the useFetch with a key. So every time the slug has changed, it will request it. That prevents useFetch to be triggered several times if the root doesn't change. Okay, that's what I understand about it. So if you add this and you refresh the page, you should be able to navigate through different characters without any issue. Okay. So it seems like we have our client-side rendering page. So let's get back to it. So to finalize the client-side rendering, let's check again the diagram that I put on the beginning, and let's check if our implementation fulfills that. So basically, we are fetching a page. The client receives from the server a blank page that only contains reference to an to a JavaScript bundle containing our view, application, and this Vue application, when the browser interprets the JavaScript, is creating the VDOM elements and then injecting it here. So if we go here to our recent app and we go to network, let's go to network. I will increase the size here so it's pretty visible, and let's refresh the page. And filter by all, we get from the local host, the root page, a blank page, and here we can see that we are getting basic DOM with a script type module that gets the button. Okay. Also, we can see that here we can see the fetch that the client does, like is fetching the data for the characters, also is fetching, for example, this module JavaScript, and also a lot of different things from here. Okay, this is client-side render. So this is awesome if you're doing a web application. If you have a login here and you're getting the data for an authenticated user, it works well. Okay, but this is not great for pages of content that needs SEO. It's not the best in performance. If we go to another one, for example, to one of the detail page, you will see that it doesn't query anything else. It's not querying localhost again. Okay, and if we check for Steve Harrington, you will see that it's actually only fetching the API request. It's not fetching any page or HTML with the Steve Harrington. So everything is dynamic. This works perfectly for dynamic content. So now that we saw how easy it is to implement a client-side rendering application with Nuxt, let's talk about the pros and cons. Basically, the pros are that you have SPA support. It's the only one that allows this. It's really fast on the server. You can statically deploy it, and you have a fast site rendering after initial load. But the problem is, or one of the cons, is that that initial load is pretty slow, because the bundle size is bigger, everything is in the bundle, and it takes, you basically delivering a blank page. So your user, until the JavaScript executes, only see a blank page. It doesn't see any content. So in terms of performance, it's not the best choice. Also, it has a lot of CEO issues, because the crawlers that are basically checking all the web pages only see a blank page. They don't know what is inside of the JavaScript. And also, if you disable the JavaScript in your browser, you're not going to be able to see anything. So you're probably asking yourself, what are the use cases of using client-side rendering? Well, basically, if you're creating a web app that changes a lot, is dynamically, is interactive, etc., and you don't care about SEO or performance, it could be a web application for your intranet that you basically create in a dashboard or whatever, then a client-side rendering app makes sense for you. Also, it's great for POCs or like really quick implementations, proof of concept, those kind of things. Okay, now let's talk about server-side rendering. And here is where frameworks like Nuxt or Next.js, in case you're using React, really shines. Because to be completely honest, we could have done the same thing that we did before with plain VueJS. So what's the difference? The difference is in server-side rendering, when the client does a request to your web server, instead of delivering a blank page, the web server is going to run VueJS code on the server. And this is going to render our HTML before we get it. So we basically get in an HTML that is already rendered, okay, and it has the JavaScript files and the styles. And then Vue runs again on the browser and do a process that is called iteration. So basically makes the page interactive, okay. Vue is going to run on the client, it's going to make it interactive, but the user is always going to see something on the page because it was pre-rendered, well, not pre-rendered, but it was rendered on the server, okay? Let's see how we can achieve that with Nuxt. So before we continue with the server-side rendering part, I just want to tell you that in the repository, I created a branch only with the CSR version, okay? And we are gonna check out another branch to add the SSR, okay? So how can we convert our app to a server-side render? And you will be surprised how easy it is. Basically, we remove from the config the SSR false, we save, and let's run again our server with npm run dev. We go to Chrome, we refresh again. It's gonna start the server. By the way, this is cool. Okay, and here we have our application again. So what have changed now? If we go to inspect mode and we go to network and we refresh the page, let's check what is in the first request here. Remember, the client-side renderer delivers a blank page, but now the server is returning an HTML with all the content available. Maybe it doesn't have the styles yet because they are added by Nuxt on the iteration phase, but it does have everything. So we can check the response here, and if we open just to see it, okay? Let's format the HTML so we can see it better, and maybe remove the sidebar. We can see that now the HTML contains all the markup for our application. It has already resolved the view components and rendering on the server. Okay, so here we have all the content, all the links, etc. already here. So what is gonna happen is that Nuxt is gonna iterate again the application. We can see it here in the first diagram. Is going to reiterate, because here we have our UI components, but I put a different color here to differentiate the ones that are interactive. I have the styles between the ones that the server returns. So when you got it on the browser, it's gonna run again the Nuxt application, and it's gonna reiterate, and it's gonna add the styles, the functionality, etc., and we are gonna have our application. Something cool about Nuxt is that look what happened here. You remember that for the client-side rendering, whenever we were fetching the characters, we had here on the API fetch, we have a character ones, but you see that now we don't have it. It's because this fetch call is done in the server before it renders, and it's not done by the client anymore. But look what happened if we navigate inside our server-side render. We go to the page of Steve. Now we can see that there is a fetch call with the data of Steve because it wasn't in the previous one. So it kind of behaves like an SPA whenever we navigate inside. Although, if I refresh directly the page of Steve, you're gonna see that it's not anymore. The API call is not anymore here because as the previous page, it was done here on the previous request. You see? So this HTML does contain only the one for this page. So every time you refresh a page, it's gonna do the same process as we talked before on the server to render the page. But if you're navigating through the app, let's go back, for example. Now you can see that it had done a characters fetch because we are navigating between the application. I hope that's clear. If not, please write me a comment on the comment section below. Ask any question that you need. I hope it's less confusing, okay? Now that we learned how to use server-side rendering with Nuxt, let's talk about some pros and cons. The biggest pro that it has is that the content is immediately available. That means that it has a really fast initial page load. This is great for performance. Also, no additional client fetch are needed and is ideal for SEO or search engine optimization because the crawler doesn't need to run the JavaScript in order to know what is inside of the page. Also, it's ideal for sites serving only static content. If you have e-commerce or a content page and it doesn't need to be really heavily interactive and the content doesn't change that much, server-side rendering is a good option for you. Some of the cons are that this is slower on the server because basically the server needs to work more. It has to render twice, one on the server and one in the front end or the client, your application, and if your site. And if your site is really big, then it's gonna take more time. Some of the UI frameworks are not really compatible. Why? Because some of them depends on the window object, which is incompatible or is not available, which is not available on the Node.js context. Also, each time you see another page or you navigate to a different page, you need to do a full page reload. That means that you have to start the process again. So now let's see how a static site generation can fill some of the gaps of server-side rendering and balance a little bit more the equation. Let's jump now to probably the most interesting topic and the one that you wanted the most in this tutorial. Static site generation. And you might have heard of it because it got really trendy by the use of the Jamstack and all these static site generators for Gatsby, and even Next.js for React is having a full static. So how does this fill the gap for a server-side render? Let's go back to our diagrams, and here we have a similar diagram of this SSR, but the idea will be to not depend on a web server anymore. Instead of that, let's say that we have our site or Nuxt site on Netlify, and in the build phase, we pre-render each one of our character HTMLs. And then we serve that into our hosting, and it's available for the CDN. So each time a user needs one of them, instead of what happened in the SSR, each time our user wanted to see one of the character, the server needed to rebuild the whole markup again. Instead of that, in the CDN, it's going to be available the pre-rendering of that HTML with the data and the content. That is going to be requested by the client and is going to be served, and the whole process for iteration for the browser begins. That's fine. Okay, that's the idea. How we can do that with Nuxt? So if we go to here, I have something running, but I'm going to clear it. You have a command that is called Nuxt generate. Okay, and if we start that, you will see that it's building the client, and then it pre-renders each one of the HTML files for our characters. So if you go to output.public, and we can see a folder with each one of them. Here we're gonna find an HTML file for Dustin, for example, the character Dustin, and it has all the info here already. But there is a catch. If we go here and let me see what, yeah, localhost, okay, 300, and I refresh, you will see that for a moment we have all our characters, but suddenly they disappear. Also, if we go to one of our characters, let's say Steve, it doesn't work right away. And the problem is that Nuxt tree is not as full static yet, so we cannot use it as we want. What is happening here is that it pre-renders the route, it delivers them, but then it triggers the use fetch for getting the data from the server, and this gives a 404. But instead, if we go, for example, to this page, which is view those, okay? This is an amazing article page with all the resources of Vue tree, and I have an article here. And you can see that if we request it, we're gonna have, of course it's using SSR, but it's using static site generation. So this is pre-rendering and it's delivered really fast into my client. Okay, so Nuxt 2, it does allow full static mode. The rendering is universal, so it's SSR, and the deployment is static. So you can already do this with Nuxt 2. With Nuxt 3, it's not yet available. There is this issue open, but I was looking for another one. I think it's this one, because basically the issue was exactly what is happening to me on the application for Upside Down. So use page is called the API and route change instead of using the pre-saved data. And that's because it's still a work in progress, the hybrid rendering and route caching rules. So we don't have the full static mode yet. But before we go empty-handed, I want to show you the advantage of pre-rendering. So it is possible to pre-render using the build here in Nuxt. Okay, this is gonna create a hybrid app because it's gonna create our normal server with our routes, okay, but it's also pre-render the pages that we ask for. In this case, we are asking it for crawl all the links to Nitro. Thanks Daniel Rowe for pointing that to me. Danny is an amazing architect for the Nuxt team that is always willing to help the community. So he always helped me with this kind of stuff. So thank you for that. If you don't sponsor it yet, I don't know what you're doing with your life. So npm run, and instead of generate, let's use build. Okay. So this is going to build exactly the same. You can see here that the server before, if we use generate, it doesn't have anything, but now that we're pre-rendering, the output is gonna have the different, all the server here, and also is gonna have the pre-rendering routes. So if we open the localhost with 3, let's open the incognito mode. You can see the difference. So this one, it was the server-side render without the pre-rendering routes. And just the Steve Harrington page took around 102 milliseconds. This is how much it took for the pre-render version, which is basically like 3 seconds. And you can see that the server took less time because it doesn't have to build it. It's already built. And that's the beauty of it. So I really hope that with this, as static site generation is a little bit more clear. Let's wait for Nuxt to release the full static mode. I will do a follow-up video with that implementation, but for now, I hope you have a better understanding of what client-side rendering, server-side rendering, and also static site generation, the benefits, the pros and cons, and how to implement it with Nuxt. And that's pretty much for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did by recording and editing. You can find the code for this repository in the description right below. If you like it, please drop a like, subscribe, and hit that bell button to get more videos like this. Happy coding!